Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we are discussing the new Apprentice movie. Briefly, the film chronicles the rise of Donald Trump, eager to take over not only New York but the entire world. Directed by Ali Abbasi, the film stars Jeremy Strong and Sebastian Stan in some of the best performances of the year. I hope this gets the love it deserves. There are times I was watching Sebastian Stan and I really thought he was Donald Trump. I also love the aesthetic of this film. It's absolutely stunning. It recreates the grain and texture of the 1970s. As the movie goes from decade to decade, the look of the movie changes to account for the changes in technology. Now, a movie about a politician, especially a controversial one like Donald Trump before an election, should have been an easy sell for Hollywood. And yet no studio wanted anything to do with this film. It took a lot for it to actually get a distributor. And this is a trend I've noticed not just with political movies, but with political documentaries. And I urge you to see this film. I think it's a fascinating case study about fame, ego, and power. Although the movie is focused on Donald Trump, the real star is Jeremy Strong as Roy Cohn. I left the movie wanting to watch a movie about Roy Cohn starring Jeremy Strong, who gives a man described as a lawyer who hated lawyers, a Jewish man who hated Jewish people, a gay man who hated gay people, a lot more humanity than he deserved. Roy Cohn was considered one of the most despicable figures in the American judicial system, described as a snake, a scoundrel, basically everything but a child of God. He was considered Teflon. He's one of the few men who were able to successfully beat the system. He was incredibly intelligent and very skilled at manipulating the law and bending it in his favor. He also did a fantastic job of creating a public persona that was in such stark contrast to his private one, to who he actually was as a person. This is a skill he would pass on to his most successful mentee, Donald Trump. I thought the way that Sebastian Stan played Donald Trump was absolutely brilliant, and I could actually feel his growth over a period of time. I thought the young Donald Trump was played impeccably, and you see it in his performance as a young man desperately trying to get his father's business out of trouble to a real estate tycoon. The way the movie depicted the relationship between Roy and Donald was almost like as a father-son relationship. Donald Trump's father was also a real estate developer who really pushed his sons to follow in his footsteps. Up until the moment he met Cohen, Trump was desperately trying to prove to his father that he could take Trump Village and turn it into Trump Tower. He wanted to elevate the family's status to heights they didn't even think was possible. Donald Trump first started working with Roy after the Department of Justice sued them for racist rental practices. And I think a lot of the reason that Roy appealed to Donald is because, unlike his father, he could not only protect him, but he could back him. Roy saw himself in Donald and he really believed he would be successful. And I think in a lot of ways, and you see this in the film, Roy believed that he could create this little monster that he could control. He never imagined that this Frankenstein would go on to devour him. When we first meet Donald Trump, he's this young man at this exclusive club in New York. He looks uncomfortable. He doesn't really know what to do with himself. The minute he starts to interact with Roy, he gains access to spaces that not even his father could possibly dream of. I thought the movie did a great job of depicting Donald Trump's growth over time, kind of his psychology. And you see it in the way he moves throughout the film. At first, he's very uncomfortable in these new spaces. Although he comes from a wealthy family, there are levels to this. And then he goes from super grateful and super just, starstruck to literally just incredibly comfortable in places he could barely get into previously. One minute he's knocking on doors, begging to be heard, and you see it in the film, to literally just knocking them down. And all of this is thanks to this man, Roy. And Roy is actually credited with giving Trump not only the legal advice, but the contacts needed to get his foot in the door and start to carve out a legacy outside of his father. Roy was key to a lot of Trump's huge projects, Trump Tower in particular, a project riddled with corruption. The tower was built mostly by illegal immigrants who are not paid. I think my only criticism with the film is that we didn't see enough of Roy, and I think it tries to cover too much of Donald Trump's life, and there just wasn't really enough time for it. And we don't actually see the relationship between Donald and Roy disintegrate. He just appears less and less on screen, and I feel like that was a missed opportunity. And to be honest, when Roy was not on screen, when Jeremy Strong was not on screen, I was very disappointed. If I didn't see his face, I needed to hear his voice because, to be honest, he was the movie. They could have easily just called this film The Mentor, and I would have been perfectly fine with it. And so the more power that Roy gives Donald, the bigger his ego becomes and the less of Roy we see, because he no longer feels that he needs him anymore. I also loved how the movie played on Trump's relationship to substance abuse and this issue of addiction. Donald Trump's older brother was an alcoholic who died of a heart attack, and this was a moment in his life that totally shattered him. His brother was a pilot, and he appeared to really love his job. However, his father was so ashamed of his son's profession that it drove him to madness. Everything about this family, I think the film does a good job of trying to get us to understand the family dynamic within the Trump household and how important Donald Trump's father was, because pursuing your passions in this family was just not something that you do. And Donald Trump has always had it in his head that he was going to build on the family legacy and make them more successful. And so he's always avoided things like drugs and alcohol. Even before his brother's death, he never really drank. And you see that in the film. Like, this man cannot hold his liquor. However, drugs and alcohol are not the only addictive stimulants out there. I think what Roy got him hooked on was power. He gave him a taste of what is possible. And as soon as Trump could see the results, he became addicted. He wanted more and more and more and more. And that's something you notice about Sebastian Stan's character. Like, he goes from kind of just wanting to help his father to just wanting to take over the whole world. You see it in the film. He expands way too quickly. He makes promises that he clearly can't keep, but it doesn't faze him at all. I thought the film did a good job of utilizing Trump's physicality. The more famous he becomes, the more ugly he becomes. The discrepancy between his public persona and what's going on in his private life become night and day, and he becomes both charismatic and ugly at the same time. Like, you don't know whether to hate him, you don't know if we're laughing at him or with him, especially in the early days. Like, he does such a fantastic job of carving out this public image that he would later build on in the future. And the way that his body changes is incredible. Like, he starts to gain weight, he starts to lose hair. Like, he becomes a totally different person. In a lot of ways, he starts to take on the worst of his mentor. And Roy's impact is felt even when he's not on screen. Donald Trump starts to take on his mannerisms, his behaviors, his way of talking. He even takes on a lot of his teachings as his own. Like, he stops giving Roy credit for anything. And the better he becomes at manipulating people and using them to his advantage, the worse off he becomes, right? His health just keeps deteriorating. Roy was very good at taking advantage of every connection he made. He was essentially the ultimate string puller. Unfortunately, he burned way more bridges than he could make up for. And towards the end of his life, his past fully caught up with him. And this is a trend that you're seeing, or a pattern that you start to see in his mentee, Donald Trump, in his apprentice, Donald Trump, towards the end of the movie. Donald Trump's personality towards the end of the movie, again, it's almost like he's taken on this shell that's so inauthentic to who he was at the start of the film. Now, Roy, he really taught Donald Trump how to claw his way to the top of high society, how to use people to his advantage. However, hubris got the best of Roy. He flew way too close to the sun and he came crashing down. Now, fast forward decades later, Donald Trump is already a one-term president. Potentially, he could become a two-term president. And Donald Trump has risen to heights that Roy could never have dreamed of. Like, he exceeded everyone's expectations. And one of the things I loved about Roy's character, and this is something that Donald Trump later takes on as he starts to really appropriate his mentor's identity as his own, is that Roy claimed that a lot of his actions were rooted in a love for America, like wanting to make America great again. However, as the movie goes on, we see that it's actually rooted in greed, fame, and ego. And Roy taught Donald Trump how to deflect, how to create phony issues for people to focus on. And Roy was a fantastic lawyer. Like, this guy would blackmail, scam, he would do anything to get his clients out of trouble. And he often was successful. That's the thing. He was a really great lawyer. Like, he knew how to break the law and win. I think what Roy was able to do quite successfully, and something that Donald Trump has adapted, is he kind of made himself the face of the anti-establishment. So any criticism of Roy is just fake news. It's just the establishment's way of undermining all the work that he's done, all the good that he's done, when really it's just corruption. Now the question becomes whether or not Donald Trump actually surpasses his mentor, Roy, and becomes immune to all consequences, or he ends up falling from a height the world has never seen before. Like, the story is still open. It's very far from over. This is going to be a crazy next few weeks, next year, next 4 years. So you guys let me know what you think. I think this movie is definitely worth watching. I think it's a shame that Hollywood no longer buys political documentaries or promote. Like, a movie like this, I feel like in the 80s or 90s would have been an easy sell. So it's just very strange to me that this movie is not getting the attention that it deserves. But please go see it if you can. Ali Abbasi is a fantastic director. Another one of his films I really enjoyed is Holy Spider. And you guys let me know what you think.